the Angry Spork. If you grew up in the 1980s, like myself, then you likely did so with a certain familiarity with two properties that managed to be entertaining and enduring, despite being little more than a bunch of half-hour toy commercials. One was based on a toy line originating in 1962, which was refurbished in the 1980s to include lasers, wacky nicknames, and some more cultural diversity. The other was rebranded from the Diaclone and Microman series from Japan. The American versions shared animation styles, voice actors, and in teases here and there, possibly the same animated universe. And while these two properties have crossed over in the past, I'm taking issue with G.I. Joe vs. Transformers, a 6-part series from Image Comics circa 2003, written by Josh Blaylock and featuring art by Mike S. Miller, Armando Duruthi, and Lynx Studios. Let's start with issue number 1 and see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. The cover, at least the copy I bought, is a neat little fusion of the Cobra crest and the Decepticon emblem within, having the same metallic purple of the latter. We open on the inside of a ship, light gradually breaking through, as we see familiar Cybertronians in stasis and with serious wear on them. On a 2-page spread, Cobra Commander and a squad of subordinates have made themselves an entrance. Enough time passes to be considered soon, as the Baroness mentions their tip from an arms dealer was on the money.
Do you have anything to add based on your conversation with the Scotsman?
Only that I couldn't tell if he was cursing at me or telling me to have a nice day. His accent was so heavy and cartoonish. They take notice of the Decepticon emblem, and the commander muses it could be a symbol of allegiance, which strikes me as an absurdly accurate guess. Maybe this version of Cobra's top serpent is smarter than his cartoon counterpart, but it's a pet peeve of mine when someone makes such a tongue-in-cheek statement like that in these kind of stories. Anyway, the emblem is on the chest of none other than Megatron, who says the line he's legally obligated to say ever since the first animated film. He passes out again, and Cobra readies to transport every alien to their base and cover their tracks. Okay, use explosives to cover your tracks. That makes sense. That should work. But how exactly do you intend on transporting what is likely dozens of these multi-story, multi-ton alien robots? You have U-Haul on standby or something? We cut to an undetermined amount of time later, where a Colonel Abernathy is one of several soldiers on their way to a security job at a peace summit in Washington, D.C. He's fairly no-nonsense about it, noting they don't need to know the particulars of the job, and scolding another soldier for snickering, and not just because the bet that Snake Eyes couldn't stay quiet for the trip. And look at that truck nearby. Arbco. Is that anything like Arby's? Anyway, at the summit, Don Knotts' twin brother is questioning recent actions of the administration. Not naming names, but since this is 2003... There are protesters around, but nothing more exciting than that, until Abernathy gets a call of aircraft approaching without clearance. Oh, and a giant explosion caused by Cobra vehicles firing and driving into the crowd. And it looks like they were hidden inside Arbco Industry trucks! Wait a minute. Arbco is just Cobra with the letters jumbled. They would have caught this if the military didn't exclude convicted meddlers.
Word jumbles. Makes those long between mystery miles just fly by.
Abernathy and his crew do what they can, but are apparently unaccustomed to the use of lasers. That's when the earlier mentioned enemy aircraft arrive, but is quickly tailed by the Air Force. The lead craft is helmed by Cobra Commander, who is warned by Megatron, secured in his holster, but isn't deterred by the possibility of being overwhelmed or words from a talking gun. The crafts are unusually fast and are somehow deflecting their scanners, and one, pursued by a pilot called Ace, does an impossible 90-degree turn upwards before turning into a giant robot. Ace has just enough wits about him to eject as Thundercracker destroys his plane. On the ground, more vehicles are rolling in, one carrying the Baroness, who says not to harm the media for the sake of their commander's impending message, as they close in on the UN. At first I thought this was a goof, as the UN is famously located in New York City. However, I did a little research, and they do indeed have facilities in Washington, D.C. Besides, laser-mounted death machines or not, do you think they'd be able to get through Manhattan traffic? With everything prepared for Phase 2, Double C orders the activation of the Battle Android Troopers, and another 2-page spread reveals Cobra-clad forms of Ratchet, Ironhide, and Optimus Prime. I blame you for this. The commander detaches from and activates his Night Raven android, which transforms into Starscream, amusing Megatron as the most historically treacherous Decepticon became the chosen transport for Cobra's leader. Also, fun nod to the fact that Starscream and the commander had the same voice actor. Some of the enemy aircrafts have been taken out, and reinforcements are on the way, but there are still robots smashing the UN. One of them, I think, is Ironhide. However, Optimus remains still, offering more resistance than the others.
Yes, that's right!
Starscream fires at a tank carrying Snake Eyes and an unnamed blonde woman. Not sure if she's supposed to be a Joe or what, she's not exactly in uniform. Afterwards, she goes to see if he's alive, and he is, but apparently has looked better. Sometime later, various news outlets are reporting on the attack, which ended after the enemy abruptly left. However, not before leaving their name etched in some rubble. General Flagg is showing this to Abernathy, and introduces Dashiell Fairborn, aka Flint, and Allison Burnett, better known as Lady J. They'll all be working together as they form a task force of the toughest, baddest, bravest, craziest SOBs the United States has to offer. Codename G.I. Joe.
Why is it called that?
Classified.
Okay. How are we going to fund it? Through the government? Ha! Of course not. We get our money the best, fastest way we know how. Merchandising of George Lucasian proportions.
Lady J has spent a year investigating the previously underestimated Cobra, alongside the FBI and CIA, and has files on suspected members. Flint, as Chief Tactical Strategist, already has several plans based on J's findings. Abernathy, as the youngest active colonel and West Point valedictorian, is tasked with leading G.I. Joe.
With this panel, you might say he's the optimal choice.
The back cover features Cobra Commander aiming gun mode Megatron in one direction, and the spirit of Megatron scowling in the other direction, possibly upset over hearing Cobra Commander go pew 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 when no one else is around. Issue number 2's cover features Soundwave and his cassette minions while Destro's image is in the background. Not bad per se, just delivering on the title in a way that's not overly spoilery. Within an island base in the Caribbean, Megatron says the Energon reserves from the Ark are almost dry, and doubts the Earthlings are able to manufacture more. The commander thinks the pessimistic pistol could stand to be more helpful and trust in human ingenuity as they turn their attention to the ever-resistant His-14, whose brain Dr. Mindbender is still trying to hack. Though delighting that Optimus Prime may eventually be forced to lay waste to innocent beings, Megatron says he gave enough info to Cobra Commander when he got trapped in gun mode, however that happened, and threatens to kill the would-be world ruler upon his liberation.
You're not the only Megatron I can deal with. There are T-Rexes, there are tanks and choppers, even one that's a giant floating head. I've got my options.
Despite looking like a mummy and some doctors thinking the robot attack left him unstable, Snake Eyes has decided to join G.I. Joe, much to Abernathy's gratitude, complimenting the young soldier's skills, including those of the ninja variety. And, well, I don't know if he can still blush under there, but Abernathy insists he means it. Meanwhile, a collection of soldiers gather in a hangar, including Joe mainstays like Doc and Scarlet, who talk about how Snake Eyes will likely never talk again, and his face is apparently beyond repair. And with his family killed in the attack while on their way for a surprise visit, he has little else but the cause now. And that's when he and Abernathy walk in. Awkward does not begin to cover it. Later, General Flagg is meeting with his lead officers and going over a list of names with corresponding code names for the team, and we see a couple Easter eggs. For one thing, it looks like Snake Eyes' real surname begins with J, and another is the Transformers' original kid sidekick, Spike Witwicky, whose code name apparently is just Spike. Though if you look closely, he's the only one listed that goes first name then last, rather than the other way around like everyone else.
Unless his name in this universe is Witwicky Spike, which is somehow stupider.
Lady J notes that in collaboration with Sergeant Conrad Hauser, known as Duke to Joe fans, she may have discovered Cobra's money trail and possibly their next target. We are then taken to a parking lot where an anxious Bumblebee and Wheeljack hear about the fourth Cobra attack in 2 months, and still haven't found a clue to their comrade's location. However, Jack deduces the terrorist organization has been restricting themselves to hit-and-run operations because of limited energon reserves, and several of their attacks suggest they may be trying to harness it in some way. Thinking he knows where to access further information, he scans a passerby for his driver hologram, and he takes his leave with Bumblebee, who takes the form of a hippie.
I'd rather have my voice box damaged and have to communicate in beeps or pop culture entertainment from Earth. No, beeps all the way.
At Cobra's base, Mindbender installs circuitry into Optimus's head, connecting it to their systems in hopes that it will correct the problem of the red sigil robots being so resistant. Unfortunately for one of his technicians, he loses control as something, possibly a virus, is downloaded. So even though it risks damaging the machine's OS, Mindbender has them cut power to interrupt the transfer. And wouldn't you know it, that's when the commander calls about a temporary breach in their firewall. The not-so-good doctor plays it cool, saying it was only a power surge, and will have his men double-check things, while he reports to the landing pad to greet the arms dealer mentioned in Issue 1. We then jump to Echelon 5, the NSA's headquarters, for monitoring every electronic transmission in the U.S.
I think it's amazing they managed to find that many people who are that committed to the monotony of listening to someone hang up on telemarketers, fax lewd images to unsuspecting recipients, and read about Nigerian princes who have banking troubles.
One such worker, Michael, is in a heated debate comparing Jennifer Garner and Eliza Dushku. About their qualifications in fields of science, I'm sure, when he finds some information important enough to interrupt a meeting of someone he calls Mainframe, who doesn't really like that nickname. However, the info is indeed intriguing and leaves the rest of the meeting in Michael's hands. That's when we jump to a sparring match at Joe HQ. Don't worry, this won't take long. That's why they call me Quick Kick.
Really? I thought it was because someone wasn't feeling very inventive when coming up with a new toy mold, and it only stuck because of the rhyme scheme. Out of all the wacky Joe names over the years, I always thought that was by far the silliest.
It's not long before both he and Roadblock are simultaneously challenged by Snake Eyes. He'd better mop the floor with him or he's never living down that outfit.
Have you never seen how any of the other Joes dress?
On a 2-page spread, Snake takes them both down in just a few moves, which so impresses the others in attendance, including Thor, that they welcome him with a dog pile. But it's all 10 hut and salutes when Abernathy arrives with Flag, Lady J, and someone named Mercer. He's a Cobra defector they detained until the giant robot attacks made the information he initially gave a bit more believable. You can tell he used to be evil because he randomly spits on the floor. When the soldiers don't believe Mercer's claims that the machines are alien in origin, they're shown photos of the Ark being dismantled and sent to their Roswell facility, because of course it has to be Roswell. And while Mercer was never high enough in the ranks to know where the robots are being hidden, he does know where Cobra will strike next. And Lady J adds that the robots may well be sentient.
I see this character drawn like that, and part of me thinks Lady J is hot. Then another part of me notes that it's a pretty obvious oversexed interpretation of her 80s design. The clothes now cut in such a way to show more skin than you'd think would be allowed in a military facility, and it feels a little shameless. Then another part of me thinks Lady J is hot. Don't judge me.
Destro arrives on Cobra Island, with some exposition from Mindbender, Major Blood, and Baroness that his metal visage is a matter of heritage, and his Mars Corporation has been a significant contributor to Cobra's operations. And of course, we have the obligatory sign that he's got a thing for evil Eastern European librarians. The commander arrives after attending to an errand, one we don't get any context for, theatrically landing in Starscream's robot mode. Touring their facility, Destro is shown what they've managed to do with their alien servants, having Jazz, I'm pretty sure, turn into a Cobra stun. They had also been working on modifying an android to replace the mobile control station they'd previously used in the field, and the comic closes on a 2-page spread of the introduction of Soundwave and his cassettes.
Which, fittingly enough, sounds like the name of an 80s rock band. So far, the premise does a good job of doing its own thing, throwing these two properties together and having them share in each other's origins, as it were. Though we haven't seen much of the way of verses, it is only 1/3 of the way through the story.
Though even in that short amount of time, we should be getting some actual character development, not just archetypes. Snake Eyes lost his family, and the most we've seen him do is shrug and go, "Oh gosh," in a silent way about being complimented for his skills. The art can be pretty indulgent, not just because of Lady J's saucy but questionable attire, but that some of the guys have what look like an unhealthy amount of veins bulging through their skin. And one thing I found very weird, Colonel Abernathy is better known typically as Hawk in the Joe franchise, but he looks exactly like Duke, even to the point where I thought he was supposed to be Duke until Lady J mentioned Conrad Hauser, and it reminded me, oh yeah, that's Duke's real name.
They also have a few quirks when it comes to passage of time. We pretty much go straight from Cobra finding the Cybertronians to them being used in battle, with no explanation of how long it took to utilize them in such a fashion. And by the second issue, 2 months have passed, and we've seen the Joes do bupkis. Tune in next week, and maybe we'll get some answers, like how Megs got stuck in gun mode, what did Prime download onto Cobra's systems, and how Soundwave got to keep his name. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues. Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with G.I. Joe vs. Transformers from Image Comics. Autobot and Decepticon alike are made tools of war for the terrorist group Cobra, while G.I. Joe is just being built up. With Wheeljack and Bumblebee searching for their allies, and a Cobra turncoat named Mercer offering valuable information, the arms dealer Destro arrives and is introduced to Soundwave.
Issue 3's cover sees the Joes close in on a bewildered yellow Autobot. That's right, they're swarming Bumblebee. We open on a splash page of Destro, flanked by some guards, with Dr. Mindbender, Cobra Commander, Soundwave, and his cassettes reflected in various places on his mask. It's a nice attention to detail, especially given all those curves and contours. It's mentioned that a senator's death in the UN summit alleviated certain profit-killing sanctions for Destro, as he's shown 14 Snake battle mechs, with more on the way. Though it's hinted that they can't keep pilots inside during transformation without things getting, messy.
I'd like to point out that test pilot survived.
And I don't dislike the designs at all, but they kind of do look like one of those mecha from Gurren Lagann if they were designed by MODOK after a Star Wars marathon. And I've never watched Gurren Lagann. The Scotsman wants to personally test Soundwave in the field, specifically Cobra's planned attack at the SPS Center, and he's not taking no for an answer. Having been given the schematics in advance, he'll be able to control the robot, but the commander isn't about to let him go alone. Then we see a newscaster reporting on a photo of Soundwave that had been emailed to enough people that it became newsworthy. Its authenticity, of course, denied by the US government.
This is what happens when villainy becomes such a casual thing. They start Instagramming their doomsday weapons.
The news is watched by Flint, not so much Lady J, as the former has already done his strategic outlines, confident in any one of them to work out. Then they're called to a meeting they're already late for. Soon, they're briefed on the USS PS, a top-secret, powerful solar-powered satellite, the prototype of which is currently in orbit. Its intent is to gather solar radiation to beam down via microwaves and have even more in orbit to cut use of fossil fuels by 2018.
And nothing yet.
And according to Mercer, Cobra plans to usurp the satellite and power the transformers indefinitely.
Environmentally safe doom!
We jump to a Destro-controlled Soundwave, closing in on the facility controlling the satellite, and deploying the cassettes while Zartan and Firefly cloak in updated-looking trouble bubbles. Yes, that's what they actually called them. It was the 80s. Just as he's about to have one of the cassettes open fire, it's shot by one of the workers, a Joe called Sci-Fi that I guess must have been disguised before this panel, having successfully tested their own laser weapon. Roadblock and two other Joes take on the Flyers, but with bullets. Ratbat is shot down, but Laserbeak makes it inside where other real American heroes await, but is soon decapitated by Snake Eyes, while Flash and Sci-Fi, who I guess each got a laser gun, are hit by the seismic attack of Rumble?
Wait, I thought Frenzy was blue and Rumble was red. Was Fibreer all a lie?
Sideswipe and Sunstreaker are barreling towards the building until they're deflected by Wheeljack, while Rumble is likewise knocked aside by Bumblebee. Master of Disguise that's not currently disguised, Zartan, takes out Quick Kick, Mutt, and his Mutt junkyard, resorting to tranks and knocking them out while cloaked, while Firefly is busy placing charges. Does make you wonder why he didn't get more lethal given his advantage. B takes some debris off the Joe techs, saying that he needs their help, but it's also just the right thing to do. He's then approached by tanks and told to exit the robot, which, for a Cybertronian, is probably like telling him to have an out-of-chassis experience. Anyway, CoverGirl fires a missile at him since she apparently missed the briefing about how the giant space robots could be sentient, or she's just got an itchy trigger finger. He fortunately deflects it at an enemy while Wheeljack tackles Soundwave, and Sci-Fi vouches for the yellow Autobot.
You might say on his behalf.
Yes, fuel me with your disdain!
Kick and Mutt are up and about, the latter wanting revenge for his dog, and they enter a secure room while each finds different levels of humor in a joke about getting probed. Zartan is making an exit while leaving Ravage to deal with the Joes. Outside, given Wheeljack's assault and the incoming military aircraft as backup, Destro confirms his allies are ready, so he decides to retrieve the other androids and meet them on the way to Cobra Island. We miss out on Ravage scratching the Joe's clothes to death, and the Robocat leaves just as Mutt was preparing to use a grenade to maybe take him out, though certainly kill him and his buddy. With Mutt's leg injured, Quick Kick begins helping him out before one of several successive explosions rock the facility from the lower levels. As dramatic as that sounds, it's mere panels before the dust has apparently settled, and it looks like everyone has gotten out. Quick Kick will be fine, and at worst Mutt is in critical condition. Seems the only fatality here was the impact of the supposed threat. though it's admitted that things could have been worse as B cautiously approaches. I come in peace?
Oh, you can't fool us. We've seen Michael Bay's movies. We know you're about to leak coolant on us.
Abernathy is hesitant to offer any trust, but hey, so is Wheeljack, transforming in front of them after a couple of Joes get out of his front seats. Don't know what they were doing in there in the first place, but whatever. He offers some incapacitated Decepticons. I guess Destro didn't feel like retrieving all his little helpers. And in return, the bots are shown the image of Soundwave circulating the news, now with an indecipherable text that we didn't see earlier. And the good news is, it's a Cybertronian code from Optimus Prime, containing their whereabouts and information on the network Cobra uses to control them. As Jack attempts to do some work himself, several Joes instinctively take aim. But Abernathy tells them to stand down and
Sweet Jamie Madrox, he and Duke look exactly alike!
one of his fingers opens up to reveal multiple smaller digits able to work on an Earth keyboard, intended to show Cobra something it will never forget.
If it's a cat meme, we already tried that. Our social media Joe was pretty heartbroken at the failure of that particular mission. Poor mean tweet.
On Cobra Island, Mindbender is marveling at how adept the purple and green robots are at construction, hintity hint hint. But then they start rebelling, threatening to rip him apart.
What? Did you spoke?
Even with those ellipses, the progression of words there is just plain weird. I guess we're supposed to assume that Baldy fumbled his tenses in fear and forgot how to English speak good. Minute, waiter.
He tries calling his leader on the matter, but...
I'd love to help you, Doctor, but I think I have a problem of my own.
More than you know, Cobra Commander. More than you know.
The B cover for issue 4 is a wraparound, featuring the formed Devastator, various Transformers that are kind of difficult to identify, and Optimus Prime about to enter into battle while Snake Eyes drops down nearby. And in the foreground, the Commander is seen brandishing Megatron, as if he thinks he's sneaking up on Prime. Silly little snake. At Joe headquarters, Wheeljack explains that apparent attempted hacking of Prime's brain granted him access to Cobra's systems, if only briefly. This allowed him the opportunity to take that image of Soundwave and attach text in his native language that no human would be able to decipher. While the Constructicons taunt Mindbender on Cobra Island, not sure that needed a splash page, but whatever, Destro, Zartan, and Firefly have the software needed to take control of the supersolar satellite, and are ready to take their remaining payment and then their leave. And that's when Soundwave offers a dissenting view. Prime is about to secure Cobra Commander for human authorities, incidentally jamming his only way out, and Megatron won't fire after the unwilling aid he'd been previously forced to give, and demands that the only way his blue-cloaked slave driver will survive is to free him entirely. The Commander throws him aside, and at the press of a button on his belt, Megatron transforms to confront his oldest enemy.
Fear of public speaking, I mean Optimus Prime!
As more Cybertronians are liberated and Decepticons start busting up the place, the Autobots regain their senses, and after a brief scare of Cobra trying to bring Ironhide back under control, they intend to teach their persecutors a lesson, after they find Prime. And on a lighter side of things, Major Blood tries to fly to safety, only to be trapped in the, chest pit of Thundercracker. I'll fire up my engines when I feel like it, but right now, I feel more like taking a stroll.
Maybe stop by the local stray animal depository, get myself one of those selectively bred canines, and start writing screenplays for Earth Entertainment while living out of an agricultural storage hut.
Abernathy and Flint are preparing for their mission when two generals arrive, Renegar and Horn. Their intent is to take the two alien automatons to Area 51 for study and disassembly, and try reverse engineering what they can learn with the three damaged foes from the fight earlier.
No disassemble.
As for Cobra Island, the Joes are on standby and being replaced with a simple nuclear strike intended to destroy Cobra and the Transformers. The aircraft B and Jack are currently waiting in is conveniently equipped with a magnetic pulse generator to incapacitate them for their imminent incarceration. As the generals depart, Hawk regretfully follows his orders. After telling his crew of the gist of the new plan, Wheeljack struggles to inform him that a nuclear attack on a base with Energon would end up devastating the planet.
But whatever you do, don't try telling your commanding officers about this and try to get them to change their minds. Don't be intelligent about it. Oh.
As the two old adversaries bust through a wall, Megatron gloats that he saved more energy than Prime while he and Cobra Commander were, attached at the hip. But Optimus still has plenty of fight left in him. However, an off-panel blast from none other than Soundwave aids in knocking Prime down. Megs orders his right-hand bot to find whichever Cobra goon has the SPS component so he can use the satellite for unlimited energon on Earth. We don't see Wave leave as Megs prepares to finally end Prime, but he must have, as the Tyrant is shot by Starscream, ever the snake in the grass. But Megatron blasts him back for ruining his plans, and finding Prime's backup has arrived. Cobra Commander tries running for a speedboat to retreat, but it's destroyed by a pair of trouble bubbles, actually Gears and Brawn.
I say we relocate his head from his shoulders. Don't be hasty. I'll cut you a deal.
I let Optimus Prime negotiate my deals. You'd be surprised how far his freedom is the right all sentient beings speech goes when you're looking for a decent apartment.
Before they can make good on any kind of threat, the bots are struck from their 6 o'clock by a snake mecha piloted by Storm Shadow, making a late entry into the story. While the commander scampers off, Shadow shows how easily he can hold off the two Cybertronians. After a call for assistance from Baroness, the ninja says he wants to make sure their leader is safe before rendezvousing at her coordinates. Why is he so loyal? The story never says. Meanwhile, Rumble is closing in on Destro and Zartan, only to be stepped on by Baroness in a Cobra mech of her own. She expresses relief that Tin Face is still alive, and offers 2 more snakes that they can pilot.
So, what was the danger that needed Storm Shadow's assistance? What was the emergency? You don't look like you finished some intense battle, and there are 2 other goons with you, it looks like, so why exactly did you need the ninja?
In the Cobra lair, Soundwave keeps the Constructicons from seeing who'd get a wish from Dr. Mindbender, as he's needed for the SPS satellite. While the meatbag is taken away to do his new job, the group will protect the satellite module and, if need be, combine. In the meantime, Wave begins generating storage tubes for their impending Energon. In Washington, D.C., Horn and Renegar contact 3 other generals in a darkened room of the Pentagon for some reason, and are informed of the status of G.I. Joe, specifically that they've gone against orders and have set course for Cobra Island.
I know I joked about this earlier, but why hasn't Hawk told the generals that Energon and nuclear blasts really don't mix? I mean, is the writer just really that committed to the action movie cliche that the top brass in the military really just want to solve every problem with the biggest possible explosion? And then again, if that's the case, then if Hawk did tell them, we'd get the standard angry assumption that it's all a trick, that the Joes are going to have to follow their orders anyway. So maybe all we lost is really just more of the cliche.
In case you've been wondering since issue 2 why Bumblebee and Wheeljack weren't captured, they were sealed off in a different part of the ship, so Cobra didn't even know they were there when they blasted the cavern and the ship's AI, Teletran 1, brought them back online. Then, with no segue whatsoever, Hawk expresses concern if he's doing the right thing, willing to take all the blame when the time comes. Wild Bill, the pilot that Abernathy is expositing all this to while their fleet is en route, says the Joes know that they're disobeying orders, because the right thing is more important.
And that's how this issue ends. No to be continued caption or anything. And given the look at that last panel, it's just a weird way to go out.
We got a lot more action in these issues, which was nice, and now that more of the Transformers can speak, we did get a little hint at the kind of personalities some of the characters had from the cartoon, which, even though there wasn't much, was pretty well translated here. But there were moments where pacing was a little off, like there being a whole page between two Joes facing off against Ravage, and then Ravage doing some pretty minor damage to them when you think about it. And of course, we get the standard cliche of military generals that care more about big kabooms than intel. And boy, did that plane with the immobilizing generator seem convenient. While I initially didn't think too much about how Bumblebee and Wheeljack managed to avoid capture, it was something that was worth explaining. It's just that I think it could have been done better, felt less tacked on, and done earlier in the story. But hey, maybe it was something they forgot to add until later in the writing process.
Tune in next week when I wrap up the series. Does it become a real American hero story, or does it transform and fall apart? I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues. Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the final installments of G.I. Joe vs. Transformers. As the Cobra co-opted Cybertronians regain their independence and cause havoc on Cobra Island, recent Joe allies Bumblebee and Wheeljack are incapacitated by command of Colonel Abernathy's superiors. However, when it's revealed the military's nuclear strike will cause a world-ending chain reaction, the Joes defy orders and head to the enemy base.
Issue 5's cover features Storm Shadow standing atop Optimus Prime's head, separated from his bullet-ridden torso. Guy's always trying to one-up Snake Eyes, isn't he? And though not scanned, the inside cover states that Josh Blaylock got some help from Dan Jolly in these last two issues. We open to a fleet of aircrafts carrying the Joes, within 5 minutes of reaching Cobra Island. After Abernathy confirms court-martial or cracked Earth choices to Duke, Lady J announces enemy aircraft are within visual range, but they're leaving the island base amid the chaos of giant robots fighting each other. They land on the beach and glide in from the sky, first met by automated guns, which they announce they've taken out as they're firing. Couldn't spare a panel to show the guns getting blown up? Oh well, I guess. The Joes advance until they arrive at a 5-bot brawl. Mother of pearl! It's just like Jurassic Park! If all the dinosaurs had big honking guns!
Wait a minute. Would this mean that Cobra Commander is Wayne Knight? Oh man, John Lithgow's Twitter rant was right all along!
At the Pentagon, 3 generals, who were probably the ones we saw conferencing with Renegar and Horn last issue, are trying to convince the president to authorize a nuclear strike, but he's worried about fallout. And they put in the effort to actually draw in the likeness of then-real President George W. Bush. Though the comic Commander-in-Chief eventually gives the command, to, I think, eavesdropping Flag's chagrin, convinced by the paranoid generals that the robots are too dangerous to let roam free. I don't know, some version of Optimus Prime thought it was a good idea at one point.
Alright, that was a stupid movie. Now, regardless of what you think of the real W and his tenure in the White House, the authorization is really more about the drama of the escalated threat to the heroes and enemies alike, rather than something someone seriously thinks the real guy would do in that kind of situation. Wouldn't be much tension if the president shot them down from the get-go, would there?
And since Flag is obviously there, not saying anything, I guess Hawk never relayed the whole threat of a nuke mixing with the Energon? Whatever. Well, Megatron orders Dr. Mindbender to get to work harnessing the SPS satellite to fill the Energon cubes.
Reflector will assist you!
I guess in Decepticon culture, assist means shoving and repeating orders. So a yellow beam of energy turns purple and the cubes Soundwave generated become luminescent. And the panel progression makes it kind of abrupt. How is that energy getting inside the cubes? How is microwave transmission being turned into the specific kind of fuel the Cybertronians need?
I know it's taking a lot from 80s cartoons, which weren't always the most thought-provoking, but for a 2003 comic, a little more elaboration would be nice, even if it was mostly visual. For a visual medium.
Constructicons combine to form Devastator in rather subdued fashion. I mean, I don't want this story to be a bunch of space-wasting splash pages or two-page spreads, but this is the first time in the story we see a combiner group, heck, the only combiner group, merge into one even gianter robot. I think it needs a bit more gravitas. But here we are, and there goes Hound. As Autobots tackle the towering foe, Snake Eyes encounters Starscream, musing about holding the ninja hostage.
What's wrong? Did I upset you in a past life?
Odd thing for Starscream to say. Any Starscream I can think of, anyway. Didn't know Cybertronians believed in reincarnation.
Snake wastes no time slashing the flyer's eye and shoving in a round object. As Screamer falls back, screaming, and knocking the Joe away, we jump to Prime resting from the outcome of his fight with Megatron, the one from last issue on which we got no resolution. Seriously, last we saw, Prime's reinforcements arrived. Next thing we know, Megs is overseeing the Energon collection. Again, guys, a little explanation would be nice. With his nemesis stockpiling their unique fuel source, Prime intends to simply barrel his way through, weakened state or not, while his soldiers run interference. Meanwhile, Cobra Commander is being carried by a squad of mechas when they're beset by an Autobot quartet. They begin fighting back to protect their leader, but the bots handle them easily, until Storm Shadow rips off Trailbreaker's head. At that point, he's robo-dogpiled by the other three. Distraction enough for the commander to slither away.
I'm going to need another ninja.
Maybe I could get one of those turtles to join me. Probably the one in red. Because aren't turtles just snakes with limbs and shells?
The Energon collection goes well until Optimus goes full Kool-Aid Man and topples some of the cubes. Megatron calls Prime's bluff about detonating the Energon and taking them all out, and orders his bots to attack. Ravage is deployed and some cons fire, but the Autobot leader is absorbing the energy from the cubes by doing squat exercises? He has enough power that he punches through Soundwave's chest, avoiding any vital circuitry, and tosses aside another two foes. That's when Ravage finally attacks. Kinda wonder what he was doing this whole time. Lying in wait, maybe? But it was all for naught, as the Panther goes down in one squeeze, and Megs has made a run for it.
Good thing his alt mode is a gun and not something that could potentially move faster than a giant robot like a tank or a helicopter or a flying T-Rex.
As Devastator is toppled and Cobra goons are overtaken, Hawk gets word from General Flagg of the President's approval of a nuclear strike. Even if they manage to defeat their enemies and dispose of the Energon in the 15 minutes before launch, they likely won't escape the blast radius. 250 miles away, the USS Kohler is preparing for launch, having confirmed that the authentication is genuines.
Isn't there some statute out there against launching nuclear weapons based on a typo?
Issue 6 has another wraparound cover, with Prime, the Autobots, and G.I. Joe running from an enormous blast that is seen engulfing large robotic figures.
Don't worry, they were probably repaints. Wait a minute. What if they were cooler-looking repaints? No!
As the missiles are unleashed, Hawk announces what we already know about the looming danger. Seriously, it looks like he's looking at the reader in case they'd forgotten in the month between issues. With 5 minutes until impact for anyone to come up with some ideas, Wheeljack contacts Mainframe at the SPS Center. Guess he got over not liking that nickname. He thinks that if the two of them and Sci-Fi can put their heads together, they can reprogram the satellite to take out the nukes. Joes and Autobots group up outside the facility, strangely deserted, and as the missiles reach the upper atmosphere, they find Dr. Mindbender hiding and convince him to lend a hand. In under a minute, Bumblebee is playing with leftover cubes, while Mindstash is grumbling about Firefly taking off. Speaking of, a bomb is detonated, leaving a hole big enough for Storm Shadow and his battle-damaged Snake to get through, alongside Firefly and a small contingent of leftover Cobra agents.
They never did explain what that stands for, did they? Super neat, awesome killing exosuits? Steve's new attack kit expansion? Or did nobody actually think it out and just wanted a serpent-themed name for their little mini Gundams?
Bumblebee takes on the ninja, while a couple Joes gloat about how they're taking out off-panel Cobra with lasers. Seriously, why aren't we actually seeing it? Wheeljack shields Mainframe and Mindbender long enough for them to reposition the satellite and take out the missiles. And hey, looks like those 3 other Autobots weakened Storm Shadow enough for B to take him down solo. No other indication as to how that earlier fight played out, though. Unfortunately, a final stray enemy laser hits the control panel, and the satellite now begins firing uncontrollably.
Good job, CoverGirl.
One beam seems to take out Thundercracker, and possibly Major Blood if he's still in there.
Good job, CoverGirl. Wait a minute. This means Buster's the doggy orphan. Good job, CoverGirl.
Cobra Commander is hiding at the base of a cliff when he comes across Starscream, and if the human would dislodge the grenade stuck in his eye, they could perhaps arrive at an agreement of some sort. So if it's a grenade, why hasn't it detonated yet? Anyway, while Megatron is still running from Prime and unable to fly, his attempts to flee are interrupted by a squad of Joes. They open fire and the Tyrant is insulted, attacking with his energy mace, and he seems to be preparing to fire when Mercer is vaporized, apparently by the solar beams, and so is Megatron's macing hand. It's weird how they framed it to look like Megs was going to shoot him, but it turns out it was probably just the solar beams given the color of the energy. Whatever, though. The Joes resume firing at the indignant Decepticon, who's then confronted by the fully charged Optimus Prime once again. While Mindbender sulks at their impending doom and Mainframe tries to figure out a solution, the Cybertronian leaders begin their latest in the long-running series of one-on-one brawls. As Prime dominates the fight, fueled by all the pain and death his foe has inflicted, Megatron scoffs how his own philosophy of power and force turned out to be correct. Knocking Megatron down with a decisive kick, Prime says he'll consider those words during Megs' disassembly. He calls dibs on the Khan's trademark arm cannon, has Mainframe send him the coordinates of the satellite, and with an energon boost, he opens fire and eliminates the satellite.
Finally, a story with a big energy beam shooting into the sky that's saving the Earth instead of threatening it.
Prime knocks Megs out for good measure, and then we get jumped ahead 10 weeks, briefly at a New Mexico facility where someone in a lab coat walks into an elevator. Sounds like a lead-in to a bad joke, but moving on. We then go to Fairborn, Ohio, where Optimus says his goodbyes to General Hawk, grateful for the assistance in the construction of the new Ark to return to Cybertron. Primus willing it's still around, of course. A lot can happen in a few million years. Though the Joes got their own individualized mech suits out of the deal. And come to think of it, Hasbro did just acquire the Power Rangers, so... Power Rangers! So the Autobots blast off, and we see that the 2 villainous characters that have shared voice actors a couple times ended up in an airplane repair shop in the Florida Keys. The big metal one being intransigent, and the other wishing he'd pulled the pin on the grenade. So Snake Eyes got knocked away before he could pull the pin. I suppose that clears it up nicely enough. In New Mexico, yeah, that tease earlier was totally necessary, the Mystery Man enters a room full of Transformer parts, assured that their specimens are reported dead. They intend to have things running better than Cobra within a year, and the story concludes with a status update on Megatron, being 29% complete. And that was G.I. Joe versus the Transformers. For a nostalgia fix, it was pretty fun. The story was serviceable, but overall, I have to say it was okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. I did like the art, even though at times there were certain exaggerations, but the adaptations and redesigns of the Transformers are faithful and unique where necessary. The Joes themselves don't seem to change much either. But yeah, realistically speaking, it is curious that a specially trained army is going into battle against advanced technology, some of it alive, and they don't think to wear protective armor. One guy's wearing a jersey and another has no shirt. But I guess they're relying more on nostalgia and the campy nature of the cartoons to overshadow that. Maybe it worked to a degree, because I was a bit more concerned with how there was little to no distinction between Hawk and Duke. I mean, what the heck, man? If you're going to clone a member of the team, my vote would have been for Lady J. I did a bit of image searching, and I guess there was some point in older comics where Hawk was blonde, but as they seem to more echo the 80s cartoon in this series, I would have thought they'd have given him darker hair. But then maybe they thought he'd look too much like Flint. I did think Abernathy was supposed to be Duke, but that could have been cleared up if they actually called him Hawk a time or two before the 4th issue, when Wheeljack called him by that name, though we had no context for it. Much like many episodes of either cartoon, there are a lot of featured characters but very little focus on most of them, and not much depth or explanation behind Cobra's plans or why some characters were recruited beyond clever nicknaming. Well, clever-ish. We see a few characters die, but very little mourning. We got more reaction from the Autobots when Trailbreaker lost his head, and given that they're robots, I think the fatality of that is in question. Of course, Mercer barely had more personality than he did purpose the story. He came in, gave some information, and that was it. Makes his death seem more done for the sake of cheap drama. Even those older cartoons could manage some more depth and character building, even if some episodes included soldiers rocking out or Flint standing guard while Scarlet and Lady J were sunbathing on the roof of their headquarters. If saucy sunbather guard duty was an option, I would have joined G.I. Joe a long time ago. But anyway, there are larger problems than any of that, however. Like some of the clunkiness of the exposition, be it how 2 Autobots avoided capture, or being told things that are actively occurring off-panel. Why not include the visuals of sentry guns being destroyed or laser-incapacitated Cobra fodder? This is an action story, after all. And I noticed that for all the talk of what a great strategist Flint was supposed to be, there's never an indication that any of his plans were actually implemented. Also, given that the Transformers were under Cobra's control, why did some of them seem to be smiling at times? Of course, I'm talking about the Decepticons. I guess despite having their autonomy lost, they take some joy in getting to smash stuff. Though you'd think that someone within Cobra would have noticed something like that and said something to Mindbender. And as for that last page, I think that it's a stretch enough that the Autobots would give the Joes the capability of building their own individual mechs, but you're telling me Prime wouldn't want to account for the remains of his enemies? And what about Megatron? Are they building another one? Or was he also left behind because Optimus somehow felt comfortable leaving his most fearsome and tenacious enemy to be locked up on a planet full of tiny flesh folk? Though much of the story works fine, there are a lot of conveniences and holes that really should have been cleared up before final printing. All told, it feels like the shows were updated with a bit of an added edge for an audience that had aged about 2 decades. A little blood here, some death there, though some deaths seemed a bit more ambiguous than others. Same basic character designs, but with a soupçon of exposed cleavage. But there were other times it seemed they were playing it safe for any younger readers that might pick this up. If you enjoyed the cartoons from the 80s, you'll probably get a kick out of this six-parter. And maybe you'll even hear the appropriate voice actors in your head when you read the dialogue. But it may not be appreciated by the unfamiliar readers, who may be more familiar with the newer Transformers cartoons or the movies, or heck, even G.I. Joe Renegades. Next week, Crossover Year hits one of the most epic marks ever, as two entire universes vie for survival. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.